If we had no winter, the spring would not be so pleasant. If we did not sometimes taste adversity, prosperity would not be so welcome. Anne Bradstreet. Welcome. Thank you for listening to Warfare, Advancement, and Revisionism. My name is Preston Floyd. Today, we are going to continue our journey from the last episode, which left off around 40,000 years ago. We also saw the end of our hominid cousins that were still remaining, the Neanderthals, Homo forensis, aka the hobbits, the Denisovans, probably. As we'll get into a little bit later, they may still be kicking around, but that's kind of debated. We also saw ourselves develop more fantastical storytelling. We saw those animal-esque humans hunting in Indonesia, so these were theranthropic representations of humans. And then in Germany, around the same time, we saw that carving of the lion-human hybrid. This episode, we will continue those type of developments, as well as our technological developments and our continuing peopling of the world. So, I hope you are ready to continue with episode 7. Let's get on into it. So, when we left off 40,000 years ago, we were in the south of Asia and the eastern coast, most likely. We were in the Sahul, which is modern-day Australia, and we were in southern Europe and the Caspian Steppes. Now, as we continue from there, in France, in southern France, I should say, at Abricassanet and Gros Cheval Pont d'Arc, and I am butchering that pronunciation, I know, please accept my apology, French people. We see more human artistic development. At Abricassanet, at 37,000 years ago, we see the earliest found artistic representations of strictly human forms. It's a possible fertility symbol. I think it's like supposedly a vulva. And at 35,000 years ago at Gros Cheval, we see kind of a possible animation in cave art. So we have animals that they kind of have lighter outlines at one place, and then a more detailed outline and shape in a different part. So it's either meant to represent multiple animals just all together, or it's possible that these are animals kind of moving. We really don't know. And then at the same time frame in Hohlfels, Germany, we see a mammoth ivory carved human sculpture, female. It kind of depicts a Venus figurine, and of course Venus in this case is a common term used for carved female images from this time frame. It's basically just meant to stand in as fertility totems. There's a famous one we'll get to a little bit later, of course, the Venus of Willendorf. Now at 32,000 years ago, we see another big jump in our practical technology. We see food plant processing, which of course we've done at small scales before, but this seems to be done with wild oats. And of course what you get from grinding oats like that is not the same as what you'd get maybe from from leafy vegetables or things like that, in which case you get a paste. If you're grinding oats and grains, you're getting flour. So it's very possible that is used for cooking and storage purposes. So that's a big difference. And this is not just happening in Grotta Pagliacci, Italy. It's happening all across Europe, and we found evidence around this same time period in Australia. So this is something that's probably happening everywhere that humans have access to these wild grains and oats. Now, a little bit later than this, there is a possibility, it's a bit of a controversy, that we have the first humans incursions into the Americas. Specifically Mexico, I think they have found a trove of microblades and other artifacts suggesting, obviously human shaping of rock at 32,000 years ago. Now, if they were there this early, and it's still a possibility they weren't, this could just be misdating. They're not sure. This is a fairly recent discovery, I think from July of 2022. If we were there this early, this group was not long for the world. They kind of, because this would have happened in a period where the temperatures were rising, but it's before the last glacial maximum, which is 26,000 years ago. I think it was when that starts, and it goes to about 19,000 years ago. So they may have gotten kind of separated and divided from humanity and just didn't have the food or technology available to survive. And then, of course, by the time that we do have that technology and make our final push into the Americas, they would have been long extinct and, been untraceable by the peoples moving in. Excuse me. And again, this is just, it's just speculation at this point. And that's from a Nature article. Cyprian F. Artelin, Lorena Becara Valdivia, and Eska Villerslev are the authors. And that was published in July 22nd, 2020. So very, very early days in that study. So we'll see where that ends up. But it's possible that a very intrepid group of Homo sapiens moved that far that early. Now, after that, in Georgia, the country, obviously, in the Caspian area, in the Caucasus, we find the earliest woven fabrics made from flax. And these are dyed as well. So that's, I think they were probably used for baskets and some clothing. I don't know how warm that would have been in the colder climes north of Georgia, but you never know. I guess if they made them thick enough, if they were capable of that at this point. But yeah, so we, in addition to having furs and leather, we now have woven fabrics. And then from there, in Austria, about 500 years after this, we find the famous Venus of Willendorf, which is a very famous statuette. It's ochre limestone, or ochre tinted limestone, and that was found in what is today Willendorf, Austria. And around the same time, we find the earliest fishing net sinkers, so weights used to get your nets down and stay down once they hit the floor to help you reel in fish. And this is found in South Korea, or what is today South Korea. So, out in East Asia, we find a lot of the more advanced fishing technologies, or at least the earliest examples of these fishing technologies. Fish being a popular part of the diet there, that's not surprising. It's, to this day, still very, very important aspect of diets in a lot of those countries there. Japan, China, Korea, of course. Now, about 25,000 years ago, there is a possibility of, believe it or not, a coronavirus epidemic. And it's very possible that this played havoc on the population at that time in that area that may have killed out a large portion of the Homo sapiens living there, and then they were eventually replaced by a later group. I think in East Asia and in Europe, there's evidence that 40,000 years ago we got there, we kind of took out or assimilated the other Homo groups in the area, and then they lived there for a time, and then their populations dropped or died out, and then about 19,000 or 14,000 years ago, somewhere in that time frame, a new group moved in with more technology, and they were able to stay around a little bit longer, and assume or subsume those remaining earlier settlers. And it's possible that in East Asia, at least, that this coronavirus outbreak contributed to that. There's an article that you can find at it is. I'm trying to find that in my notes. Yes, Current Biology, Cell Current Biology. There is the authors are Yassine Solimi, Elise Lauterbur, and Ray Tobler were the top three billed, but there were some other authors. And this was published in June 24th, 2021. So, yeah, we have been battling coronaviruses for quite some time, and it's very possible that this affected our adaptation, at least in this region. But there's another big piece of technology coming that I want to bring up, and this is actually happening back in Africa, our motherland, in the Limpopo Mountains in South Africa. There is evidence of ricin being produced and being, of course, used on arrow tips. Now, this, of course, is incredible. Dangerous, but incredible. Of course, ricin is a neurotoxin, an extremely potent one. And the fact that we're developing this, before agriculture is pretty impressive. And this type of technique is still used in that area by the modern day San or Khoisan people in that area. They are very good at finding poisonous animals and extracting the toxins from them, and then they just need to nick an animal and then follow its tracks and wait for it to die. This is a very economical and smart way to hunt. And they were doing it very early. So it's no surprise that this area of the world at this time is still the most populous, probably. There are probably more humans living here for quite some time, until the advent of agriculture. And we'll get back to these people fairly soon, or this group of people, I should say. Now, while we're here in Limpopo, there is something I should have maybe started with at the start of the episode, just in terms of dating. But I did want to kind of do this all at once because I think it makes more sense. So in Limpopo, at the 40,000 year mark, there has been found a bone tool. It's made of a baboon fibula, and it's got kind of cuts and markings around it. Technically speaking, I think it's slightly older than 40,000 years. I think it could be up to 43,000 years ago, according to radiocarbon dating. But this is a notched bone. Now, that in and of itself isn't anything spectacular. There are far older notch bones, but this one seems like it could have an actual functional meaning. It has 29 notches, and it may have been used kind of as a lunar phase counter, to kind of keep track of the moon. There's a possibility that this may have been used by African women for keeping track of menstrual cycles, or it could just be, counting, the time between the moon showing up. But the bone is broken. So there may be more than 29 notches. There could be, it could be something completely different. It could be a case that, this was, just half of, something. This could be far more than 29 marks. And of course, there's also the possibility that it could just be strictly decoration, that there's no deeper meaning to this. It's also kind of hard to tell because the notches on these bones um, aren't consistent. Some have like a kind of a kind of a lack of symmetry between each mark. Um, but the reason I bring that up now is because around this time there is another bone found in Ishango, which is currently in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And this is, I think, much more likely to be a kind of a tally stick or a marker. Um, it's a little bit different. It does seem to kind of indicate that there are um, possibly a base 12 counting system. There are a couple of different columns on this. There is, I think, two 60 columns and one 48 column. So it's very possible that this could be the earliest form of a counting system. There have been some to suggest that this may have also been used to track the lunar phases. I don't know if I buy it on this bone specifically because there's a 48 tally mark. But I guess if you were tracking maybe gestation, how long you've been pregnant, that actually might count into it. But it doesn't quite line up with that. But that being said, in Africa, there is evidence of higher number systems than your fingers and toes, basically. So they have developed some level, I think, of at least rudimentary calculus, or not calculus, calculation or addition. No evidence of subtraction just yet, but we'll get there. Now back to and the Shango bone is much younger. It's about 20,000 years, so we're kind of cutting back and forth here. But we will continue from after the production of ricin. But yeah, so 25,000 years ago, we have developed chemical and biological weapons, or at least rudimentary forms of those. But on a happier note, much happier indeed, at 23,000 years ago, we probably began the domestication of dogs. And this would be the first domestication in human history that we're aware of. I don't think we can count head lice and body lice. That was not planned by any means. But we see dogs descending from gray wolves. Of course, they have been with us since then. We've kept them all that time, and dogs were very helpful to us, I'm sure, in those early days, and not just in a companion manner that they are like today. These would be working animals. They pull sleds, help us hunt, track, things like that, be used for defense. They could be considered an early warning system for any dangers from outside groups. Now, where dogs come from is a little bit of a mystery. Probably somewhere in Siberia, and it's easy kind of to track kind of the dispersal of dogs along with dispersal of humans in different groups. There is a possibility that a kind of a sister species to the first, well, not the first group of dogs, but kind of a break off of this initial wolf dog population ended up in Japan and kind of became wild again. Japan had a form of wolf that went extinct, I think, in the 19th century, and they've done some genetic research on some of those specimens, and it seems like they're very closely related to those early dogs. But yeah, so probably somewhere in the Eurasian steppe, we found dogs and adopted them, and they adopted us, and we've kind of been working together side by side ever since. There's a movie about this, and I forget the title, but it's probably going to be one of our meta episodes coming up here in the next couple of weeks. So please look forward to that. Now, at the same time, while some of our ancestors were having fun and inventing the dog, for lack of a better term. We do see in what is today Israel along the Sea of Galilee, groups of hunter-gatherers begin to add fish to their diet there. They develop huts, brush huts. These have sealed floors. They would have a hearth, and then they have stockpiles of various berries and seeds, along with grindstones and sleeping areas made with similar grass bedding to what we discussed a couple of episodes ago in the south of Africa. Excuse me. So they're developing what are probably our earliest homes that are not naturally occurring like caves. Now, about 3,000 years after that, we develop pottery for cooking. This happens in what is today China. I think the exact site is Zhanrendong Cave. And these are not, I don't think these are particularly small vessels. I think they're fairly large, at least for what you would think of for a clay pot. I could be wrong. I could not find a picture of what they found. But, yeah, so these are used to kind of cook group meals, from my understanding. Now, at this time, at the 20,000 year mark, the sea levels begin to rise again. There's a period of deglaciation, and it gets close to today's current levels. Not all at once. There's a period, this is going on for about 10,000 years, but it starts right around now, at least from what we can guess. There are some other kind of ideas of what's happening here, and I'll get into that shortly. But essentially, yeah, the sea levels begin to rise. Certain parts of our populations are cut off from others, specifically in Australia, and parts of Southeast Asia. They're going to be kind of cut off in Indonesia, places like that. And this, about 1,000 years after that, we get into that replacement of early modern humans across Eurasia by the ancestors of today's population. So this is that second wave I was talking about. Probably a larger group just moved in. I think it's kind of similar to what happened to Neanderthals. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was enough. And obviously by us still having Neanderthal DNA, this wasn't a complete slaughter. There was integration. Now, at 50,000 years ago, we have what would be the absolute latest date that Denisovans would be alive. Now, in the last episode, I mentioned I had some difficulty finding consensus on this. Most sources cite 40,000 years as the last time they were alive. That's probably correct. There is some newer evidence that suggests they could have lasted anywhere between 30 to 15,000 years ago. I think 15,000 years is stretching it. I think it's probably no later than 30. But this was done, this is a Science article published in March of 2019 by Ann Gibbons. She cites a couple of sources and researchers that say that, Denisovans, one of their lineages, very late surviving, would have been the last group to kind of interbreed in Southeast Asia. I think the 30,000 mark, I think is possible. Like I could see like a small kind of isolated group maybe lasting that long and then just being subsumed towards the end of that period. Now, at that same time frame, we do have evidence of musical instruments. I think there's a stringed instrument of some kind at Troy-Furey in France. We have music now. I know we, of course, probably sang and, just whistled, things like that, but this is the first evidence that we have of music occurring, or we're using an item outside of our bodies to create musical accompaniment. Also in France at this time, we have found evidence of a toy It's a thaumatrope. And what those are. I'm trying to think of a good example of it, but essentially, I know they were very popular. I think in the 19th century, but you would see one side would have one image, and the other side would have a separate image, and you would kind of spin back and forth between the two quick, and it would look like the images were combined. Um, if you've ever seen the movie Sleepy Hollow with Johnny Depp and Winona Ryder, um, there's a scene where Johnny Depp has a bird and a cage on a kind of a circle of cloth, one on each side, and he has a string and he's kind of like spinning them back and forth, and it looks like the bird is like flying out of the cage. That's kind of an example of a thaumatrope. I'm sure there's a modern example. I just, it's not something I deal with regularly, so I'm not sure of a good modern day example, but that's a piece of media I know has an example of it. Now, from there, we continue to see more or newer types of food added to our consumption. We have evidence of bread being baked. I think in Jordan, or what is now Jordan, I forget the name of the city, but we have it would be unleavened bread, things from einkorn or tubers, and that would kind of go into our grinding. We were probably eating it before then, but this is our earliest evidence we found of it. We also have plaster at this time frame, made from lime. This is also found in the Middle East, I think right on the coast. I think Kabaran is the site, which I'm not sure what country that's in today, unfortunately. It's somewhere in the Levant. Now, we are getting to the end of the last glacial maximum. In our next episode, we're going to get into the Younger Dryas event and go into how that last major climate change affects our food sources, which of course is going to go into how we change how we live. The number of hunter-gatherers is going to go down, while the sedentary agriculturalist will steadily begin to rise. However, the last big thing I want to talk about in this episode is about 13,400 years ago. In the north of Sudan, in the Nile River Valley, at a location known as Jebel Sahaba, there has been a couple of excavations done, one in the 60s and one fairly recently. I think in 2021 was when this article was published, so it's probably happened a few years before then. They found a number of individuals that had blunt force trauma, perforations from projectiles in the bones, and this is probably happened due to climate change and the lack of certain types of food. This is, in what is now the Sahara Desert, at a time when the water levels are rising, but, because of that, the Sahara, while green at this time, is probably starting to give less and less food on an annual basis, at least when it comes in terms of foliage. It was initially thought that this was a massive battle site, or massive for hunter-gatherers. I think this more recent kind of excavation of the area shows that some of these individuals, they were injured, yes, but they actually survived past this. This was probably a site for a group to kind of, leave their dead. Kind of a territorial marking for this group. But the violence is the important thing here. Obviously, again, we definitely had earlier, small scale violence, but the climate changing in this area is going to be very important. especially when it comes to our next episode. This is going to perpetrate a lot of violence in the future in this area and in the surrounding areas. But this is kind of the first big battle site that we have examples of, or at least that's what it was assumed to be for a long time. Again, this more recent study shows that this may be a burial site for individuals of a specific family or clan group. But we are at 30 minutes now, so I do apologize for some of there's some rough cuts where I had to cut some stuff out and put them together. My microphone was cutting in and out. I recorded about 15 minutes worth, and I realized, oh no, nothing's actually recording. So I've had to kind of go back and forth in this episode, so it may be a little rough. But I think everything's gotten where it needs to go. I may have gotten a little trailed off at the end there. But that being said, I want to thank everyone for listening. It's really, really nice hearing from people. Didn't have any real feedback, just general people just saying they enjoy the show, which is nice. No questions or anything this week. I did have a couple of people ask if I'm going to set up any kind of social media thing so they could follow and ask questions there. I think I will be doing a Twitter. I'll post the link in the description of the episode if people want to follow there. I'm not going to do much with the account. Basically, it'll just be like, hey, there's an episode this week. Please follow. But yeah, I think that's kind of what it's going to go. And that'll be easier than just people having to email me directly. But you are still able to email me at waradrevpod@gmail.com. Again, that's waradrevpod@gmail.com. Again, thank you all for listening, and I hope you have a good rest of your day and or evening. Goodbye.